The core idea of this story is one of social justice, retribution, and empowerment. At its heart, the story is about standing up against discrimination and the powerful consequences of standing one's ground in the face of injustice. The theme explores the impact of racism in public spaces and how the courage of one individual can spark a wave of change. It highlights empowerment, how one woman's refusal to accept mistreatment leads to the dismantling of a discriminatory institution. The theme of redemption also plays a role, as the antagonists must confront their own biases, and the societal structures that allow such biases to exist are challenged. This story falls under the social justice drama genre, with elements of legal thriller and social commentary. The drama centers around an incident of racial discrimination in a public setting, but the tension, suspense, and eventual resolution bring it closer to a legal and courtroom drama, where the characters' actions lead to consequences that extend far beyond their initial actions. The dominant emotion throughout this story is anger at the injustice, but also triumph and empowerment. The audience should feel the frustration of discrimination, but as the story unfolds, they will also experience a sense of vindication when the tables are turned and the wrongdoers are held accountable. There will also be an undercurrent of fear that speaking out could lead to retaliation, but also a deeper hope that standing up for what is right can change the status quo. This narrative promises to explore the consequences of ignorance and prejudice, while celebrating the strength of those who dare to confront it head-on. The moment Lena stepped into the cafe, she could already feel the tension in the air. The silence was heavy, as if everyone in the room instinctively knew that something wasn't right. Her steps echoed sharply against the cold tiles as she approached the counter, where a young man with bleached blonde hair stood, wiping the surface, his eyes fixed on her. The cafe had always been her favorite spot, a small place with the kind of charm you didn't find in chain stores, warm lights, quirky decor, and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. But today, something felt different. Lena smiled politely and leaned slightly toward the counter, hoping to catch the young man's eye. "Hi there, I'll have a cappuccino, please," she said. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes flicked up to hers for a brief moment before he looked away quickly. She frowned, unsure of what was going on. But then he spoke. "We're closed," he said, his tone flat, almost dismissive. Lena blinked, confused. She looked around, noting that the cafe was clearly open. Other customers were sitting, sipping their drinks, and no signs were posted to indicate otherwise. "Closed," Lena repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I don't see a sign, and it looks like you're serving other people." His gaze shifted over to the other customers, all of whom were white, and then back to her. The moment of hesitation before he spoke again was telling. "You can't order here," he said simply, his voice no longer even pretending to be polite. "We don't serve your kind." Lena's heart dropped. The words hit her like a punch in the chest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The anger, the humiliation, the sheer audacity of the statement, it all rushed through her like a storm. Without thinking, she took a deep breath and tried to hold it together. "I don't think I understand. Are you refusing me service because of the color of my skin?" His smirk was all she needed to answer her question. The audacity of it, the coldness in his eyes. It was as if Lena had stepped into a scene from a history book, a time where racism was so overt it couldn't be ignored. Lena's face flushed with a combination of rage and disbelief. She'd grown up in a world that told her things had gotten better, that overt racism was a thing of the past, that the world was moving toward equality. But here, in this small cafe, it was as if time had stood still. "Do you want me to repeat myself?" he asked, his voice thick with disdain. He was daring her to challenge him, to fight back. And in that moment, Lena knew she would. She stood there for a beat, her mind racing, her thoughts spinning. This wasn't just about coffee. This wasn't just about a random encounter. This was bigger. This was about standing up against the kind of hate that had no place in society. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. Lena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wasn't sure what had come over her, but something inside her clicked, a surge of power that had been buried deep for years. She wasn't going to let this man get away with it. She wasn't going to walk out of here humiliated, accepting this as normal. With a calmness that surprised even her, she looked him directly in the eyes. "I'll be back. And you'll regret this." The silence that followed was deafening. The other patrons in the cafe glanced around nervously, as if they weren't sure how to react, how to respond. But Lena wasn't concerned with them. She was concerned with herself, and with what she was about to do. As she turned and walked out of the cafe, the door shutting behind her with a soft chime, Lena knew one thing. This wouldn't be the last time she'd come face to face with this kind of injustice. But next time, it would be on her terms. Lena Matthews had learned long ago how to carry herself in a world that didn't always make room for her. At 32, she was a civil rights attorney, fiercely intelligent and unapologetically proud of her roots. She wore her natural coils like a crown and dressed with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was, structured blazers, sharp heels, and gold earrings that swayed when she walked. She lived in the heart of Atlanta, in a historic district where magnolia trees lined the sidewalks and black-owned bookstores sat nestled between vegan cafes and jazz lounges. Her condo overlooked a mural of Maya Angelou, and every morning, Lena would sip her coffee by the window and remind herself of who she was fighting for. Not just for herself, but for her ancestors, for her future children, for every voice that had been silenced. But that morning, even the view of the mural didn't calm her. Her hands trembled slightly as she tapped her spoon against her coffee cup. The events at the cafe the day before still echoed in her mind. It wasn't the first time she'd been profiled, insulted, or dismissed because of her skin, but something about that moment had crawled under her skin in a way she couldn't shake. It was the casual cruelty of it, the smirk, the assumption that she would walk away quietly. That was the thing. Lena never walked away quietly. She'd been raised by a woman who taught her that silence in the face of injustice was a form of betrayal. Her mother, Laverne Matthews, had been a teacher during the height of desegregation. She'd marched, she'd protested, and when Lena was just a child, she'd sat her down and said, "If you don't use your voice, they'll use theirs to define you." Those words had burned themselves into Lena's bones. In court, Lena was known for her fire. Her reputation was one of precision and passion, someone who could dismantle an argument with nothing but logic and a stare. Judges respected her. Opposing counsel feared her. But beneath all of that, Lena carried something deeper, a relentless, aching desire for justice. Not just in the courtroom, but everywhere. In the streets, in businesses, in spaces that claimed to be for everyone, but somehow always made people like her feel unwelcome. Yet for all her strength, Lena wasn't made of steel. She had scars too, real ones. There were days when the weight of the work nearly crushed her. Days when she cried behind closed doors. Nights when she laid awake wondering if anything was really changing. She feared being seen as too angry, too loud, too black, labels that were thrown at her constantly, even by allies. Her biggest struggle? Carrying the burden of always being the strong one. People expected her to rise above it, to turn every moment into a teaching lesson, to respond with grace when grace wasn't given. But grace had its limits, and that limit had been crossed in that cafe. The place had been called the Brew House, a boutique coffee shop that catered to hip, urban professionals. It was the kind of place that boasted about diversity on its Instagram page, but played only one kind of music and hired only one kind of face. Lena had gone there on a whim between meetings, craving a cappuccino and a few moments of quiet. She hadn't expected the storm that followed. Now, she stared at her phone, debating her next move. Her law firm, Matthews & Carter, had a strict policy about taking on personal vendettas. But was this personal? Or was this necessary? She pulled up her notes app and began to write down what happened, documenting every word, every expression, every witness. She thought about the people in that cafe, how none of them had stood up, how their silence had been louder than the insult itself. She scrolled through Yelp, curious. And there it was, buried in the reviews. Stories, hints, other black patrons who had been turned away. A woman named Rochelle said she was told they had run out of to-go cups when she tried to place an order. A man named Darius wrote that he waited 15 minutes while others were served ahead of him. Subtle, hidden, but all pointing to the same truth. This wasn't a one-time incident. It was a pattern. Lena's blood boiled. Her fingers flew across the screen as she composed an email to her partner, Michelle Carter, attaching screenshots, testimonials, and a single line in the body of the email. I want a file. And just like that, Lena shifted from victim to warrior. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had walked into that cafe and walked out with their dignity bruised. It was about calling out performative inclusion and exposing the rot underneath pretty branding. Lena stood from her breakfast table, grabbed her blazer, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were clear now. No more trembling. No more doubt. Only purpose. She wasn't afraid of the backlash. She wasn't afraid of being labeled angry or difficult. She'd wear those labels like badges. Because someone had to. And she would. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Lena's office as she sat at her desk, barely noticing the warmth of the rays on her skin. Her office was quiet, too quiet for the war that was about to begin. Michelle Carter, her law partner of 7 years, walked in without knocking. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her expression unreadable, holding Lena's printed email in her hand. "You're serious about this?" Michelle asked, closing the door behind her. Lena didn't look up. Dead serious. Michelle walked slowly toward the desk, taking a seat across from Lena. She set the email down and folded her hands over it. "This isn't just a discrimination case. This is personal. You know that, right?" Lena finally looked at her. "Of course it's personal. But it's not just personal. It's a pattern. I've already pulled multiple testimonials from people of color who were refused service or treated differently at that cafe. This is bigger than me." Michelle sighed. "Okay, but you need to know what you're stepping into. The brew house is owned by Elliott Crane, as in Crane Investments, as in donor to half the city's redevelopment boards and charities. He's connected." "I don't care if he's connected to the mayor," Lena said. "He needs to answer for what happened, for what keeps happening." Michelle gave a slow nod, eyes narrowing slightly. "All right, if you're in, I'm in." That was all Lena needed to hear. Within hours, Lena had filed an official complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, citing racial discrimination in a public accommodation. But she didn't stop there. She uploaded her written statement to her firm's website under a new section titled Justice in Progress. It was public, transparent, and just bold enough to stir the pot. By the next morning, Lena's inbox was overflowing. Some were messages of support from other Black professionals, parents, activists. A mother wrote, "Thank you for doing what I couldn't when they treated my son like he didn't belong." Another email read, "I've been silent too long. You've given us a voice." But not all the messages were kind. There were threats, too, veiled and not so veiled. Anonymous emails calling her slurs. A voicemail that said, "You should have stayed in your place, little girl." Lena listened to it once, then deleted it. Her place? Her place was wherever she decided to stand. And right now, she was standing at the front lines of a battle. But things escalated faster than even she expected. 3 days after the filing, a breaking news alert popped up on her phone. Breaking. Civil rights attorney accuses popular cafe of racial discrimination. Owner denies allegations, claims fabricated incident. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She clicked on the link. There, in a crisp blue suit, was Elliott Crane himself, standing at a podium with a smug smile on his face. This is nothing more than an attempt to gain attention and damage a local business. "We have always welcomed everyone at the brew house. These claims are baseless and defamatory," he said confidently, flanked by attorneys and a marketing manager who looked more like a PR pit crew. They were spinning the narrative already, making her out to be the aggressor, the liar, the angry Black woman on a mission to destroy a beloved community space. Lena felt her hand shake, but this time with fury. They didn't even bother to hide the strategy. Deny, discredit, deflect. Paint her as unstable. Isolate her so she'd back down. It was textbook. But Elliot Crane had underestimated who he was up against. Later that evening, Lena decided to go live on her social media. Her hands were steady now, her voice calm. She looked directly into the camera and said, "I didn't want this to be a war, but I won't let the truth be buried under PR spin and privilege. I was refused service, not because of anything I said or did, but because I am a black woman, and I am not the first." The video went viral within hours. Dozens of former customers began posting their own experiences. Hashtags flooded Twitter and TikTok. Hashtag BrewHouseBias. Hashtag WeStandWithLena. Hashtag NotJustCoffee. Some shared screenshots of messages they received from employees. One ex-barista anonymously wrote, "We were told to watch for problem customers." That was code for people who didn't look like the regulars. The tipping point came 2 days later. A woman named Tiana uploaded footage she had taken a month ago. Video of a young black man being told to leave the brew house for loitering, even though he had a coffee cup in his hand. The timestamp, the tone, the behavior, it all mirrored Lena's experience. That footage was undeniable. It aired on a local news station with the headline, "Pattern of Discrimination? Video evidence raises new questions about popular cafe." The next morning, Lena woke to find that the brewhouse's Yelp page had been locked by moderators due to an influx of negative reviews. Their Instagram comments section had been disabled. And Elliot Crane? Silent. Then came the lawsuit. Lena and Michelle filed a formal class action suit representing multiple claimants. The evidence was piling up. Lena had turned one moment of humiliation into a legal firestorm. But it wasn't over. A week after the story broke, Lena received a large, flat envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was of her walking out of her condo the day before, looking down at her phone. Across the image, scrawled in red marker, were the words, "You don't know what you've started." She stood frozen, the photo trembling in her hand. The battle for justice had just become personal. Again. But this time, darker forces were stepping out of the shadows. Lena stared at the photograph in her hands, heart pounding so loud it muted everything around her. Someone had been watching her, following her, close enough to snap a photo outside her home and send it as a threat. The crimson scrawl haunted her. "You don't know what you've started." She slowly folded the image, slid it into a drawer, and locked it. Then she stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She powered up her laptop. This wasn't just about racism at a cafe anymore. It was about intimidation, about some people, who were so afraid of the truth coming out, they were willing to try to silence her. But they had picked the wrong woman. She called Michelle first. "You need to see something," Lena said, sending the image over. A few seconds passed. Then silence. "Jesus," Michelle finally whispered. "Do you want me to call the police?" Lena sighed. "I already did. Filed a report. But there's no return address, no fingerprints that they found. The cop didn't seem too invested. Probably thinks I'm being dramatic." Michelle swore under her breath. "This is next level." Lena nodded. "Yeah, but it also means we're closer to something real." "Which is why they're trying to scare you," Michelle added. Lena leaned back in her chair. "Then we push harder." Within 48 hours, Lena expanded the scope of their legal investigation. She began collecting not only customer testimonials, but internal documentation, emails, training manuals, anything leaked from former employees. Her inbox continued to flood with stories. Some were subtle, being ignored in line, receiving visibly smaller portions, getting served last despite arriving first. Others were blatant. Denied restrooms, asked to leave, called slurs when speaking up. But one message stood out. It came from an anonymous user calling themselves Justice Watch. The subject line simply read, "You're not wrong, but you're not ready." Inside was a single sentence. "Follow the money." Attached was a PDF file containing financial records, unfiled, undeclared transactions, linking the brewhouse's parent company to city officials and members of the zoning board. The amounts were large. The dates were precise. And more than half of the recipients were involved in approving new real estate development permits in underdeveloped black neighborhoods. Lena blinked. She scrolled down. Then again. And again. This wasn't just about a racist cafe. This was about gentrification. About pushing out black communities under the guise of revitalization while funneling public funds into private profits. She picked up the phone, hands suddenly cold. Michelle, I think we just stumbled onto something way bigger. The next few days became a blur of motion. Lena worked late into the night, connecting dots, building a timeline, organizing files. She brought on 2 more researchers, paid out of pocket, and assigned them to dig into every name that appeared on those documents. Then the sabotage began. First, her office Wi-Fi started cutting out every time she tried to upload case files. Then her personal emails mysteriously disappeared from a cloud. Twice, she got locked out of her firm's website. Michelle looked pale one morning when she walked in holding her phone. "They're in the system," she said. "Someone tried to access our client database last night." Failed attempt, but still, it was someone who knew where to look. Lena pressed her palms to her temples. This isn't just pushback anymore. This is calculated, professional. They both knew what that meant. This wasn't just Elliot Crane anymore. This was a network, a system protecting itself, a system that didn't want its secrets exposed. But Lena refused to back down. She started taking extra precautions, encrypting her files, backing up everything offline, using secure networks, changing her routes home. She even started wearing a small body cam just in case. Then came the protest. It began as a simple call to action on social media. #BoycottBrewhouse. By the weekend, over 200 people gathered outside the cafe, holding signs that read, "Black Dollars Matter. Accountability is brewing. We're not just coffee, we're community." Lena stood in the crowd, wearing a black hoodie, sunglasses, and a microphone in hand. Her voice echoed through the speakers. "They tried to make me feel invisible. But today I see all of you. This isn't about me anymore. It's about every voice that's been silenced, every person made to feel less than. Today, we remind them, we are still here. We're not going anywhere." Cheers erupted. Cars honked in support. News crews showed up, cameras rolling. The brew house stayed closed that day. Elliot Crane was nowhere in sight. That evening, Lena returned to her apartment, exhausted but buzzing with adrenaline. She poured herself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Then her phone buzzed. It was a private number. She answered cautiously. "Hello." A distorted voice replied, "You still don't know what's coming." Lena's chest tightened. "You think this ends with a protest?" the voice continued. "You think you can win in a city built on silence? You're waking up ghosts that never forgot." Click. Silence. Lena sat motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear. For the first time, real fear crept into her bones. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was a war over truth, control, power, and legacy. She looked out the window, city lights flickering like restless spirits. Then she whispered to herself, "Let them come." Lena's world was already spinning, but she had no idea how deep the rabbit hole would go. The morning after the anonymous call, she woke up to a knock at her door. Not a text, not an email. A real knock, sharp and deliberate. She opened it cautiously. Standing there was a woman in her late 50s, tall, with salt and pepper locks tied back in a bun. She wore a trench coat and held a thick manila envelope in her hand. "You're Lena Baker," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Lena hesitated. "Who's asking?" "I'm not here to scare you. Name's Iris. I used to work for them." Lena's heart skipped. "Them who?" Iris looked over her shoulder, then stepped inside without waiting for permission. She closed the door gently behind her, then turned to Lena with eyes that had clearly seen too much. "Crane. The brew house. They're investors. The people behind all of this." Lena stared. "You used to work for Elliot Crane?" Iris gave a humorless smile. "Sweetheart, Elliot Crane is just a puppet. You think that man built a multi-million-dollar coffee empire on his own? Nah, he was handpicked. His job is to smile on camera and say all the right things. But the real power? That's hidden. Always has been. She handed over the envelope. Lena opened it and found dozens of internal memos, photos, spreadsheets, and emails. But the name that caught her eye, one that appeared over and over again, made her skin crawl. Marjorie Whitfield. Lena almost dropped the papers. Marjorie Whitfield was the current deputy mayor of Commerce. She was also a frequent guest speaker at equality conferences, diversity forums, and business expos promoting minority-owned ventures. She had been celebrated in magazines, honored for her equitable urban development plans. A black woman in a position of power, praised as a beacon of representation. But here, on paper, was proof of her involvement in shady land grabs, secret meetings, and lobbying to rezone black neighborhoods in favor of commercial giants, including the Brewhouse's parent company, Gravemount Holdings. Lena felt sick. "She's one of us," Lena whispered. Iris sighed. "That's how they get you to trust the system. They put a familiar face at the front so you don't see who's hiding behind the curtain." Lena sat down stunned. "I don't understand. Why are you helping me?" Iris's jaw clenched. "Because I was part of it. 15 years I worked behind the scenes, spinning narratives, burying stories, paying off journalists. I stayed quiet because they paid me well. But one day, I saw what they did to a woman who wouldn't sell her house. She was a single mother. She refused to move. Next thing I know, her home's mysteriously burned down in an accidental fire. She lost everything. And they still built a luxury cafe on that land. I knew I was done." Lena couldn't speak. "You're brave," Iris continued. "But they're watching you. You already know too much. You can't win this with protests and petitions. You need to expose everything. At once. Or not at all." Lena looked down at the files in her hand. She had been focused on Elliot Crane, thinking he was the top of the food chain. But he was just a face. The real corruption ran deep, woven into the political system, protected by power, disguised as progress. It wasn't just about racism anymore. It was about betrayal. By her own people. By those who were supposed to protect the community. She looked back at Iris. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come forward now?" Iris's eyes glistened. "Because you reminded me of who I used to be. And because this time they're planning something bigger." Lena's stomach dropped. "What?" "They've already started drawing up plans to demolish 5 more blocks in Southside. All black-owned homes and businesses. They're calling it Urban Renewal Phase 3. You have one shot to stop it. You need to go public with all of this." Lena's mind raced. She had evidence. She had witnesses. She had names. But she also had a decision to make. Because going public meant becoming a target. It meant risking her safety, her career, even her life. That night, Lena met Michelle in a quiet diner across town. The envelope sat between them on the table like a ticking bomb. Michelle flipped through the documents, mouth slightly open. This could bring the whole city down. "It's not just a cafe," Lena said quietly. "It never was." Michelle leaned forward. "If we drop this, they'll come after us." Lena nodded. "Yeah. But if we don't, they'll keep destroying lives in silence." The next morning, Lena made a choice. She scheduled a press conference. The media barely had time to react before the internet exploded. Lena stood on a podium with Iris by her side and publicly named every figure tied to Gravemount Holdings, including Marjorie Whitfield. She presented the documents. She exposed the land deals. She called out the silent alliances. And she ended with a chilling warning. "To those who thought we wouldn't speak up, you were wrong. And we're not done yet." By nightfall, her name was trending worldwide. #Lena Baker exposed the system. But then, something shifted. Suddenly, major networks pulled their coverage. Headlines were replaced with fluff pieces. Social media posts began disappearing. Lena's video was flagged for review and temporarily removed. It was a media blackout. "They're erasing it," Michelle whispered. "They're really trying to erase the whole thing." That was the final confirmation Lena needed. This wasn't a scandal. It was a cover-up in real time. Then came the betrayal. That evening, Lena received a phone call from the law firm she'd worked at for 7 years. "You've been placed on indefinite leave," the voice on the line said coldly. "Due to your current activities and the legal implications, we can no longer support your actions publicly." She hung up without replying. She knew who had made the call behind the scenes: Marjorie Whitfield. Her own people were cutting her off, silencing her, to protect their careers, their money, their access. But Lena didn't cry. She walked into her bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, looked into the mirror, and smiled. Not because she was happy, but because she finally saw the truth. This wasn't a battle for justice. It was a battle for sole ownership of a community, of identity, of history. They didn't just want her silenced. They wanted her erased, which meant she was dangerous. And that meant she was winning. Lena couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, not because of adrenaline, but because she knew what was coming next and what it would cost. The exposure had drawn attention, yes, but not from the justice system, not from law enforcement, not even from the public in a meaningful way. No, the real attention came from silence, from calls that rang twice and then stopped, from cars parked too long on her street, from messages that vanished seconds after they appeared. "You should have stayed quiet. You're making it worse for everyone. Don't end up like them." She recognized the strategy. Not loud threats, not public attacks, just pressure. Enough to make her question everything. Enough to break her. And then came the final offer. A letter, hand-delivered. No name, no return address. Just a white envelope sealed with red wax. Inside a contract. Official. Legal. Backed by Gravemount Holdings. It read, "We are prepared to offer a public apology, a $2 million settlement, and a full renovation of the South Side neighborhood, under the condition that all current litigation and media activity surrounding Ms. Lena Baker and Associates be permanently dropped. Any future statements or publications must be reviewed and cleared by Gravemount's appointed legal team. In simpler terms, take the money. Shut your mouth. We'll pretend to be the good guys." Lena stared at the offer, her hands trembling, not with fear, but rage. $2 million. That was more than she'd ever dreamed of. It could change her life. She could move her family out of danger, pay off her mother's hospital bills, fund scholarships for Southside kids, launch her own firm, buy back all the dignity the brew house tried to steal. It was the kind of offer that only came once. But it came with a collar. Golden, sure. Polished. Decorated with diamonds. But still a collar. She showed it to Michelle that night. Michelle said nothing for a long time, then finally asked, "Would it be so wrong to take it?" Lena didn't respond. Michelle continued, her voice soft. "You could still help the community, Lena. Just in a different way. From the inside. Quietly. Strategically. No more threats. No more danger." Lena stood by the window, watching the night roll over the city like a wave of ink. "That's what they want," she said finally. "To turn warriors into diplomats. To turn rage into requests." Michelle approached her gently. "But you're one woman, Lena. This fight, it's not fair. You're being asked to carry the weight of generations on your shoulders. Maybe there's a way to win without burning down everything." Lena turned, and in her eyes was a storm. "They already burned it down," she said. "We're just pretending the ashes are normal." She was torn, truly. On one hand, she could take the deal, secure her safety, help people in her own quiet way. On the other, she could reject the money, blow the lid off everything, push until the whole machine collapsed. But at what cost? Her reputation? Her future? Her life? And then she remembered something Iris had said days earlier, something that hadn't left her since. The system doesn't fear a protest. It fears a mirror. That's what she had become, a mirror, showing the world exactly what was hiding behind those clean aprons and smiling logos. And mirrors, when they're too honest, tend to get broken. The next day, Lena met with Iris again. She showed her the contract. Iris read it, then looked up slowly. "You know what they're really buying, right?" Lena nodded. "My voice," Your soul, Iris corrected. Lena exhaled. I don't know if I have it in me, she admitted. To go all the way. Iris placed a hand on hers. You already did. The moment you chose truth over comfort, you crossed the line. They can't unring that bell. Later that evening, Lena found herself back in Southside, walking the cracked sidewalks of her childhood, past boarded-up buildings and corner stores long gone. She sat on the stoop of what used to be Mrs. Gladys's Bakery, a place that once smelled of cinnamon and honey, where children were given free cookies just for being polite. Now it was rubble, an empty lot. Across from her, a new brewhouse stood gleaming, surrounded by lights, music, and influencers sipping lavender lattes. And that's when she saw her. A little black girl in a pink hoodie, standing on the curb, staring through the glass window at the pastries she couldn't afford. The girl looked at Lena, just for a second. And in that glance, something clicked. That girl didn't care about million-dollar contracts. She cared about what used to be here. She cared about who used to matter. Lena stood up. She knew her answer. She wasn't taking the deal. Because justice wasn't for sale. And even if the world forgot her name, that little girl would remember someone once said N.O. when it mattered most. The day Lena refused the offer, everything changed. Not in some cosmic movie scene way. No lights flickered, no thunder roared. But she felt it. A stillness in her bones. A kind of silence before a storm, where even the air holds its breath. She didn't wait. She submitted every piece of evidence to the Department of Justice, the local media, and, most crucially, to a growing network of independent black journalists hungry for a story no one else would touch. She released footage, names, dates, payroll documents, confidential emails. Every hidden truth about Gravemount Holdings and the brew house was now out in the open. And just like that, the fire began. News anchors picked up the story. At first cautiously, then all at once. Terms like discriminatory hiring patterns, targeted gentrification, and corporate corruption flooded headlines. Panel discussions aired. Hashtags erupted. TikToks went viral. But Gravemount fought back. Hard. They accused Lena of falsifying documents, questioned her mental health, dug into her past, searching for anything they could spin. A speeding ticket became reckless behavior. A college protest photo became radicalism. They tried everything to bury her. But something had shifted. People saw through it this time. Because this time, Lena wasn't alone. By the end of the week, former employees across the country were speaking out. Baristas, store managers, delivery drivers, black, brown, queer, disabled, each with their own story of humiliation, silencing, or erasure, each adding fuel to the blaze Lena had started. The brew house stock plummeted. Protests erupted outside flagship stores. Petitions reached hundreds of thousands of signatures. Politicians were pressured. Public figures chimed in. Then, the biggest blow came. A former executive, anonymous, but verified, leaked a memo. It showed intentional suppression of minority-led community programs in favor of a more uniform brand aesthetic. It outlined instructions to limit diversity in high-visibility locations to avoid unwanted attention or disruption. There it was. In writing. A corporate confession. The internet exploded. Lena, meanwhile, remained quiet. By design. She knew the real fight wasn't online. It was in the courtroom. She stepped into the federal hearing wearing the same blazer she wore on her first day at the brewhouse. Black, crisp, sharp as a knife. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters filled every seat. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but their presence was felt. Lena sat across from a wall of lawyers in $10,000 suits. Men who had never once looked a woman like her in the eye, unless they were billing by the hour. The lead attorney leaned over and whispered, "There's still time to walk away." Lena smiled. There really isn't. Her opening statement was short. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She told the truth. She spoke of the woman at the counter. Of the silence. The refusal. The message that a black woman didn't belong unless she was quiet, polite, and paying. She spoke of Southside, of redlining, of coded racism disguised as policy. She spoke of legacy, of how her grandmother had once cleaned the floors of a bank she wasn't allowed to enter as a customer, of how her mother raised her with a single sentence that echoed in her ears. Don't let them tell you where you belong. And then she said, they didn't just refuse to serve me a coffee. They refused to see me. And now they're going to see everything. The courtroom was still when she finished. And from there, the storm became a flood. Depositions, testimonies, class action filings. Gravemount was cornered. Within 2 weeks, 3 board members resigned. 1 was indicted for tax fraud. Investors pulled out. The company was forced to issue a public statement of apology. But Lena refused to settle. She didn't want money anymore. She wanted change. And she knew change had to be loud. So she called a press conference. Thousands gathered in front of Gravemount's headquarters. Southside showed up in full force. Elders, youth, artists, educators. Entire neighborhoods marched in unity. They weren't just angry. They were ready. And Lena took the mic. No teleprompters. No prepared remarks. Just a woman, standing in the fire. She started, speaking from a soul. For years, they told us to be quiet. They told us to wait. To prove our worth. To prove our pain. But we're done proving. We are the proof. This isn't just about coffee. It's about value, dignity, presence. And from this day on, we write our own story. The crowd roared. Not in applause. In awakening. In recognition. It was more than a protest now. It was a movement. The brewhouse tried to survive. They issued rebrands. Hired diversity consultants. Offered scholarships. But the damage was done. Within 6 months, 75% of their locations were closed. Shareholders fled. Their name became a case study in corporate arrogance and racial injustice. And the final blow? The Southside location, where it all started, was officially shuttered. Lena bought the building at auction. She didn't tear it down. She transformed it. Today, it stands as the Baker Center for Economic Justice, a community-run hub for small Black-owned businesses, legal aid, youth mentorship, and storytelling. The front wall still has a coffee bar, but the sign above it says, "We serve everyone, especially the ones you tried to forget." And behind the counter, that little girl in the pink hoodie, now 17, barista, poet, first-generation college student. She tells everyone the story of Lena Baker, of the day a woman refused to be quiet, of how a cup of coffee became a revolution. It's been 2 years since Lena Baker stood on that stage. 2 years since Gravemount crumbled. 2 years since the world started calling her a hero. But Lena never saw herself that way. To her, heroes wore boots caked with years of labor. They taught Sunday school, worked double shifts, fought quiet battles in kitchens and classrooms and corner stores. No, Lena was just done being quiet. And that was enough. The Baker Center grew fast. Faster than anyone expected. What began as a small Southside hub became a model studied by city planners, nonprofits, even Ivy League researchers. It was funded not by pity, but by partnership. Investors who understood that communities didn't need saviors. They needed the microphone. And Lena? She passed the mic constantly. She stepped back more often than she stepped in, giving space to youth leaders, to immigrant mothers, to formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs trying to make their first legal dollar. The girl in the pink hoodie, now known as Amari, started her own podcast. It's called Refused and Rising. She interviews activists, whistleblowers, and everyday warriors. The intro always begins with her voice saying, "My story started when someone told me I didn't belong." This is for everyone who ever heard the same. Lena listens to every episode, even when she's busy, especially when she's tired. Because those voices, they're the reason she kept going. The brewhouse name disappeared from storefronts. But the story lived on. It became a documentary, a college curriculum, a viral audio clip replayed in classrooms and protests and board meetings. But Lena never cashed in. She declined book deals, movie rights, brand partnerships. Instead, she kept her focus local. She still walked Southside's cracked sidewalks. Still bought groceries from Mrs. Evelyn's market. Still brought fresh bread to her neighbor's porch every Sunday morning. And on quiet nights, she'd sit by the front window with a cup of homemade tea, watching people pass the old storefront that used to be the brewhouse. Some slowed down, took pictures. Others didn't notice. But once in a while, someone would stop. A teenager, a tired mother, a man in a suit looking like he'd lost something. They'd walk up the steps, push open the glass door, and step into a place that felt like possibility. And Lena would smile. Because that was the point. Not revenge. Not punishment. Transformation. Turning pain into power. Turning silence into song. Turning refusal into revolution. One night, Amari sat beside her, sipping tea. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" Lena replied. "Not walking away. Not letting it go." Lena looked out the window, watching a child run past with a paper crown and a juice box. She thought about how easy it would have been to shrink, to fade into the background, to let someone else carry the weight. And then she said, "I don't regret a single thing, because I didn't burn down a business. I lit a fire that showed us what we were worth." They sat in silence after that. The kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness, but from wholeness. A silence earned. Lena never forgot the woman behind that counter. The cold glance. The unspoken judgment. But she didn't carry her anymore. She carried the little girl instead. The one with the pink hoodie and wide eyes. The one who saw injustice and turned it into fuel. The one who now carried others. That was the legacy. Not the scandal. Not the lawsuit. But the seed. Planted in the ashes of prejudice. Now blooming in the hearts of a generation who would never again ask permission to belong. And as the sun set over Southside, golden and stubborn and bright, Lena Baker whispered a prayer into the breeze. "Let them say whatever they want, but they'll never say again, 'We don't serve people like you.'"